Hello students, welcome to Legacy IAS Academy. In this particular video, we are going to discuss about internal security challenges and DM related question that was asked in recently concluded UPSC Mains examination of paper General Studies 3. So continuing the trend this year also, we are seeing that UPSC has asked around 4 to 5 questions from both of these topics of IASC and DM. So first question that is related to the terrorism. Again, the topic is clearly mentioned in the syllabus as such, and this was a 10 mark questions. That means you are expected to write your answer in about 150 words. Now, the first statement is first part of the question is simply a statement where they are saying that terrorism is a global scourge. Now, just because it is a statement, it does not mean that you are expected to ignore it. Whenever you are writing your answer, in the introductory part of this particular question, your attempt should be to justify this particular statement itself. So you can talk about by writing the definition of terrorism, like what is terrorism. So as defined by for example, United Nations or USA, terrorism can be considered as a phenomena in which we have necessarily use of violence by certain groups and organizations to achieve certain political and religious goals as such or ideological goals as such. And as we have seen in the recent times, attacks has taken place all across the world, and you can trace the major attacks in the recent time. For example, in Russia you have terror attacks. Before that you have in for example, in the Spain you have terror attack. In India you can talk about the recent attacks of Pahalgam and all that. How has it manifested in India? There is from your body or main body of the answer. So to start, so how has it manifested in India? Now we can talk about the different phase of terrorism that India faces challenge from. For example, we talk about one challenge we have is from the left-wing extremism or Naxalism. Now this is also nothing but an example of terrorism as such. Then apart from that also, we try to understand we have here terrorism in the form of insurgency that is widespread in the northeastern states, and at the same time we can then talk about the terrorism that we are seeing in the form of militant movement in the older times in Jammu and Kashmir region. And then you can talk about the major terror incidents that has taken place in India. For example, you can talk about recent time 26/11 attack, Pahalgam attack. Before that also we can discuss about the attacks that took place in year 2016-17 in the regions of Uri, Pulwama and all this. And after that, this would be the second part of your answer. Third is elaborate with the contemporary examples. So same thing we are discussing here. So in the last 1 decade, whatever major terror incidents India has faced, you can briefly discuss about it. Simply write this in few words as such. And then last part of your question is what are the countermeasures adopted by the state. Now here we have to ensure that whenever you are writing countermeasures, ensure that it is multi-dimensional in nature. That means while talking about countermeasures, you can talk about the institutional measure, you can talk about the legislative measures, you can talk about the security related measures that government of India has taken, you can talk about the development related measures that government of India has taken to ensure that terrorism do not spread further in India. So institutional measure, for example, we can talk about National Investigation Agency, a separate agency was created after 26/11 attack. You can talk about the NATGRIT, which was specifically created as an institutional measure. Legislative measure, you can talk about recently we have seen amendment in the two major laws of India, that is UAPA and NIA Act. You can also talk about security related measures where we can talk about the attacks that India has carried out against the refuge or the what you can call as the regions of terrorism. For example, you talk about in the Pakistan, India has carried out a strike in the Balakot region. Apart from that, recent strikes that we have seen under Operation Sindoor. Because your answer has to be contemporary in relevance, so make sure that you are including example which is of contemporary nature. And developmental related measures, for example, by revoking the Article 370 from the Jammu and Kashmir, several attempts has been made to integrate this region particularly with India. Also, we have seen the fruits of these steps taking shape here in the form of more employment opportunities for the people and the youth population of this region. A similar way in the all regions of India, in the left-wing extremism affected areas, insurgency affected areas, such kind of steps have been taken. So this should have been the overall structure of this particular question as such. Now the second question is related to the left-wing extremism directly. The government of India recently has stated that left-wing extremism will be eliminated by 2026. Now this is again, as you can see, the first part of question is a statement itself. So again in the introduction part, you can do similar kind of introduction. Either you can define what is left-wing extremism, definition we can write, that is a protected warfare based on the ideology of Mao Zedong, and it is largely deriving ideology from communist ideas, communism as such. and it began somewhere in the Naxalbari village of West Bengal in 1967, if you want to give a brief historical outline of left-wing extremism. Also, you can link it with the current affairs, because recently when we talk about the government of India, it was the Union Minister, Home Minister Amit Shah, who has said that by year 2026, in the March-April 2026, the LWE will be completely eliminated from India as such. So, this also you can link from his statement itself. Now, when you are trying to link like this, it gives idea to examiner that you are well aware with whatever going on around the in the contemporary times around you. Now, second part is, what do you understand by LWE and how are the people affected by it? So, here you have to describe, for example, you can write what is left-wing extremisms. What are its features? So, feature is protected war against state with armed violence. That is how we can define it. Deriving its idea from the Mao Zedong of China, where it stated power flows out the barrel of the gun. And you can talk about the Communist Party of India, Maoist, which is a banned organization under UAPA. It is spearheading the left-wing extremism movement. You can also talk about historically that major leaders such as Charu Mazumdar, Kanu Sanyal, these were the ones who began such kind of movement in India as such, and it today has basically over a period of time has infested a large part of Indian territory as such. Second is, how are the people affected? So again, you have to talk about people are affected on various fronts. For example, you have the increased poverty level in many regions where the left-wing extremism is rampant. Apart from that, you can also talk about how it has led to loss of so many lives, either in the crossfires between security forces and the Naxals, or even when Naxals are able to induce people to join their ranks and gangs, and many of the youth population, because they do not have enough opportunities, livelihood opportunities, economic opportunities, they are falling for it and are joining it. So, loss of human resources, or what you can call as loss of human resources, especially in the forms of youth, is other effect of terrorism. Apart from that, you have poor and weak infrastructure also you can talk about, because in the area where we have the intense left-wing extremism activities, they basically repel any kind of this development infrastructure, whether it is created by government or government for the purposes or the benefit of people as such. So, we will have poor infrastructure connectivity, roadways, railways, basic facilities are not available to them. So, all these effects we can write here. And last, what measures have been taken by government to eliminate LWE? Again, same like terrorism, here you have to have multidimensional measures. So, you can talk about security related measures, what has been done. So, here you can talk about the counter Naxal operations that government of India has launched with the help of security forces, especially CRPF, and there recently you can talk about like CRPF has actually carried out operation which has achieved a huge success by neutralizing large number of Naxals, including the top commander of Communist Party of India, Maoist, and that also we can talk about. Apart from that, we also have seen its effect, because the area affected by Naxals stood somewhere at 180 plus district in around 5 to 8 years before. Now it has reduced to just 18 district as such. So, such kind of reduction is largely due to security related measures. You can talk about Commando Battalion of Resolute Action, Cobra Battalion has been created, Operation Greyhound you can talk about. Then you can also talk about the governance related measures, similar thing, development programs has been initiated in Naxal affected areas. You can talk about the Niti Aayog's aspirational district program. You can also discuss about the civic action program that is spearheaded by the CRPF. You can also discuss about the programs in the development front, where you have a special incentive provided to the states which are affected by Naxal from the central government. So, these are all programs. Surrender and rehabilitation scheme for the Naxals also you can talk about, plus development related measures, that means infrastructure development. You have the road requirement plan, where in the Naxal affected areas government had decided to create state highways and national highways as such. Apart from that, also government has asked the local authorities, like a team of, you have district magistrate, the superintendent of police and the district forest official, to form a committee and ensure that the lowest hanging fruit of development that might be possible to tap in the Naxal affected areas should be prioritized first as such. So, based on the telecom, you have mobile tower projects also. So, all these development related schemes also you can talk about. And last, we can talk about perception management, because Naxals have been able to easily spread their propaganda, and now they have begun to do that not only in the rural remote areas, but even in the urban areas as such. So, government also has begun to tackle this by ensuring that the good works done by government and government agencies are also brought into highlight as such. So, this was also 10 mark questions, you have to write within 150 words. Next question is 15 mark questions, that is directly asking about the northeastern states, what are the major challenges to internal security, then map the various peace accords and agreement initiated with the government in this past decade. Again, a very static question. So first of all, you can highlight the northeastern region. That means the best way to start this question is by drawing the map of northeastern India as such, and then you can show all the major 7 states that you have in the northeastern region, and then you will talk about that in this area. Also, you can show international border, this entire region. You have Myanmar here, you have Bangladesh, this side we have Tibet. So the entire northeastern states are largely having a international border with either of these 3 and 4 countries. Bhutan also you have here. And then you can talk about the major challenges to internal security, which you can further bifurcate into various parts. For example, you can talk about the first challenge is obviously of secession movement. Many of the groups, tribal groups that are operating in India, in the northeastern part of India, for example, we can talk about Naga groups such as NSCN. They have continuously demanded that they want to create a separate country out of India. They do not want to remain part of Union of India. Similar kind of demand we have seen earlier and even now from one of the factions of ULFA, that is United Liberation Front of Assam. So secession movement such as run by these groups is one of the major threats. Apart from that, also you have inter-tribal conflict. That means various tribal groups themselves do not want to live in the same state. They want to have their own separate country or state as such. An example here we can talk about is Bru or Mizo conflict. Bru and Mizo conflict, that where we have seen a large number of attacks on the Bru people by the Mizo tribals. Apart from that, also we can talk about we have conflict between tribals and non-tribals. So tribal versus non-tribal conflict, and there you can talk about the contemporary example of state of Manipur where Meiteis versus Kuki is a kind of fight going on for almost 2.5 years as such. Then we can talk about, because of border areas, we have a lot of crime, cross-border crime and cross-border trafficking we can write here. There is a cross-border crime, cross-border trafficking. The reason is because this northeastern region lies close to a well-known area called as Golden Triangle, where you have Myanmar, you have Laos and you have Thailand. So these countries together make up what you call as drug corridor or drug hub of the world, and because of the nearness, large amount of drug is smuggled and trafficked to the territories of Manipur and Mizoram and all that, that also impact youth population, adversely impact the youth population. Such kind of cross-border crimes such as drug trafficking, narco trafficking is another challenge. Apart from that, we can also talk about in the context of Bangladesh, we have had a problem of influx of illegal migrants and refugees. So this is something that we can talk about along the Bangladesh border, and then you can link it with the demand of NRC and CA and all that. So this is how we can understand the internal security challenges. Overall 5, 6, 7 different you have easy dimensions that you have that you could have talked about here. Second is simple, that map the various peace accords and agreement initiated with the government in the past decade. So you have to make sure that not go in the very long in the past and talk about like what you can call as Naga peace accord and all that. You have to write about the last decade itself. So there you can talk about the accord that government of India signed with the NSCN IM, that is called as Naga Peace Framework. So in year 2015, government of India has signed Naga Peace Framework. Then further few years later, government signed another accord with the National Democratic Front of Bodoland operating in the region of Assam. Then apart from that, government of India also has signed, apart from that, this too, we can also write about the government of India has signed another accord with the Bru, also called as Riang tribe, where government has decided after the accord to settle them in the state of Tripura and not allow them or let them go back to Mizoram itself. So Bru Riang accord, very important accord. Almost after 23 years, such accord has come into fruition as such. So NDF, apart from that, we can write about the Karbi tribe, accord with the Karbi tribe. So Karbi accord. Apart from that, we can talk about the many groups that are living in the, for example, in the Meghalaya, the government of India has signed a accord with, and recently we can also discuss about ULFA. ULFA, you have PTF, that is pro-talk faction. So suspension of operation agreement has been signed with this, plus various Kuki groups you can also write about. So for example, KNA, with this government of India has signed SOO agreement, that is suspension of operation agreement, where the groups have decided to lay down their arms and to discuss about their demand in a peaceful and within the constitutional framework of India as such. So these are the major accords. Briefly about them you could have highlighted, talking also, because you have to map here So basically you have to write the accord and which state these groups were largely operating in, that you could have right here. That would have been sufficient to answer the question in 250 words. The next question that we have is directly related to maritime security problems or challenges that India is facing. And here it is asked that why is maritime security first of all vital to protect India's sea trade. So first part of the question is direct question, straightforward question. You have to link that how maritime security can be linked to the sea trade of India. And in second part, you have discussed about the maritime and coastal security challenges and the way forward. So overall, if you look, it is 15-mark question. You have to write it in 250 words, and the question can be divided into 1, 2, 3, and basically 4 parts to some extent, we can say. So in first part, simply you have to talk about, and again, the best way of starting the question is by drawing the map of India. You can draw the map of just coastline of India and talk about that how India has such a huge coastline of about 7,500 kilometers extending both toward east and west, toward east in the Bay of Bengal, toward west in the Arabian Sea as such. And then you can talk about India's sea trade by quoting data that we know that more than 90% of India's sea trade by value and more than 70% of India's trade by volume takes place via the maritime route. And then you can link that how India is heavily dependent on the Middle Eastern countries for the crude oil, natural gas, almost 80% dependency that we have. So why it is vital? It is vital because first of all, in terms of volume and by value, sea lanes of communication is very vital to ensure that trade of India takes place without any disruption as such. Second, you could also have talked about that how it is vital to ensure energy security of India. Third, you could have talked about how it is vital. It is not only vital for energy security, it is also vital from the perspective of protecting our exclusive economic zone. Then you could have talked about that how the presence of Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy, we can say PLA Navy in the Indian Ocean region also has presented a new set of challenge, and that is also we have to link with the India's sea trade, because the presence of these navy, especially from the rival countries or competitive countries, can present a new phase of challenge or new type of challenge in the future as such. That is how we could have linked that maritime security is vital to protect India's sea trade, and these are the points. Few more points you could also have added about the blue water navy capability of India in that context. Discuss maritime and coastal security challenges. So here you have to trace with the 26/11 attack, because it is one of the most notable incident that has taken place in history of India, at least in the recent time, which has awakened the government to ensure that the coastal security is not taken lightly. Rather, a slew of measures were taken after this attack. So coastal security has been strengthened significantly, and the lapses that we have been able to plug to a large extent. So security challenge you can write about in the terms of the terrorism, as we have seen in the case of 26/11. Could also have talked about in the case of, apart from terrorism, piracy is something that we are seeing along the Somali coast and also these days along the Red Sea region. You can also talk about the Houthi link attacks that we are seeing along the sea lines of communication, through which a lot of India's trade passes through. So these are the major security challenges. Presence of the enemy countries such as Pakistan. Pakistan's navy also is trying to increase its presence in this particular area, and at least with the help of Chinese navy, they are trying to patrol this entire Arabian Sea regions and all that. So in this link you have to talk about. Way forward is simple. What we have to discuss about, first of all, security related measures, how we are strengthening our naval capacities. For example, you can talk about how we have inducted several naval ships from Russia. We also are building indigenous capabilities in this regard as such. Submarine project development, we have recently signed pact with the Germany, and before that with France and all that we can write about. Apart from that, also you can talk about bilateral summits. We are also carrying out bilateral exercises, even multilateral exercises. So for example, we have recently conducted exercise with the Singaporean Navy. Before that, we have conducted exercise with the French Navy and all that. So these all measures have been taken by the government of India on security front. You can also obviously talk about Sagar and Mahasagar, that is the project government has initiated in the naval area. So you have security and growth for all in the region, and then you also have mutually acceptable holistic security and growth for all in the region. It is this, under this framework, government of India is trying to manage its sea lanes of communication and the coastal regions as such. The last question is something we can say to some extent related to disaster management. So the question is that seawater intrusion in the coastal aquifers is a major concern in India. What are the causes of seawater intrusion and the remedial measures to combat this hazard? This is a simple question. You have to again draw the coastline of India, and you can talk about that recently in the regions of Odisha. Before that, we have seen in the regions of Gujarat, in Maharashtra, right? Also in West Bengal to some extent, we are seeing intrusion of seawater, and coastal aquifers basically refer to the part on the collection of the ground reservoir which is used for the household purposes, either for the drinking purposes or any other purposes as such. So it has become a major concern because whenever seawater intrusion occurs, it increases the salinity of the water, which makes it non-potable in nature, non-usable in nature. So what are the causes? So you can list the causes. Causes can be both. Again, you can divide here to make answer more presentable. You can write anthropogenic causes, and you can also write about the natural causes. So what are the natural causes? Natural causes can be rise in sea level. That is why seawater is entering more and more toward the coastal areas. Natural cause can be increase in the intensity of storms, cyclones and all that due to climate change that is pushing more and more water, especially during the times of flooding in the coastal areas. Apart from that, natural causes we can talk about is also you have the high tides. This is something that occurs all the time. So whenever you have high tide like phenomena, you have the rise of sea level near the coast and the water intrudes near the coastal areas, and that is why if you can give the example of Gujarat coast, the western part of Gujarat coast, though it is made up of alluvial soil, alluvial plain, you can see the intrusion of seawater has rendered it infertile in nature, so cropping becomes almost impossible. But on the eastern side if you go, because during high tides water reaches up to certain limit only, so beyond high tide line you would see that soil remain fertile as such. So this is the three natural factors we can write about. Anthropogenic factors, obviously over extraction of groundwater is also linked with the intrusion of seawater in the coastal area as such, and this is something that we have seen especially due to the crops which is chosen by the farmers which are water intensive in nature that requires over extraction of groundwater, such as rice cultivation in the coastal areas of Odisha is best example of this. Apart from that, we also have destroyed coral reefs, mangroves, and lot of ecosystem in the coastal areas for our own benefit, and this has resulted in the seawater moving more and more toward inland, because earlier when you have mangroves, coral reefs, they used to act as a protection barrier and did not allow unpermitted seawater to enter the coast, but now that protection is no longer applicable here. So destruction of mangrove, coastal ecosystem, all that we can talk about. Apart from that, the third factor also we can write here is obviously you have to link it with the global warming. Actually, when you talk about natural factor, rise of sea level is also due to natural reasons, because earth is undergoing a warming phase as per the Milankovitch cycle, but also the speed has been quite higher and greater because of the anthropogenic emissions of the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane and all that. So global warming also is resulting into the seawater intrusion by rising in sea level and all that. And then you can talk about the remedial measures as such. In remedial measures, again, for example, in Gujarat, they had talked about a project called as Kalp Sarovar project. That means a kind of check dams can be constructed in the coastal areas, and the dam gates can be closed during the high tide, so the sea water cannot enter the coast. And similarly, during the low tide, dam gates could be open so that the river water and other waters can flush out the salts that are already present in the this coastal areas. So such kind of check dams can be constructed. Second, we can focus on planting more and more plants, vegetations and mangroves in the coastal areas. We can focus on restoration of coral reef, because coral reef are very important source of biodiversity in the marine areas and act as a protection barrier. We can also talk about that. Not only that, we can also ensure that coastal regulation zone is properly followed, so that the development in the coastal areas is to be such an extent that the pollution level can decrease, because many times agriculture discharge that happens also are polluting the coastal areas and all that. So these are the major remedial measures we could have talked about to address this particular hazard as such. So this is all the questions that were asked. Questions again in this particular subject we can see was based on the past trend, previous trend itself, nothing surprising as such, and these, if you have properly studied all the topics and subtopics mentioned in the UPSC notification itself in the internal security chapter in its syllabus, then you could have solved these questions easily. That is all about this particular video. Thank you very much.
Hello aspirants and welcome again to Legacy IAS Academy. In this lecture, we will be discussing Indian economy from GS3. So as you know, GS Mains 2025 have already begun and GS papers have been concluded. So in this lecture, we will be focusing on Indian economy of GS3. GS3 consists of economy, environment, science and tech, etc. We will be taking up the Indian economy part in this lecture. So let's get started. With respect to the total weightage of Indian economy, it has been around about 100 marks since the last 5 years, and this year also about 100 marks of questions have been asked. There are 4 direct questions of 15 marks, and you will also find another 3-4 questions of 10 marks each, taking the total to 100 mark. So that is about 40% of your entire GS3 paper. Now, if you look at the type of the questions, a lot of the questions do require a good amount of factual knowledge. Either you directly need to know the schemes or the things that are being done by the government in a specific dimension, or you would need to know certain facts and figures to be substantiated in your answer, because their demand of the question is such. So that becomes very important. I've been telling since a long time now that UPSC some way or the other is finding out ways to ask certain factual things as well, even in the mains exam. Even though they have checked your factual knowledge through prelims, in mains also they are checking that still. And in addition to that, the main thing that UPSC checks in your mains paper is your analytical ability. How can you analyze different situations or different things and use certain knowledge, implement certain knowledge? So implementation based questions also, but majorly the analytical ability is checked over here. The level of question as such was not tough. For example, it may be factual, but again, quite generic level of facts are required for that. So I would not say that it was hard. It was somewhere easy to medium. So you will have 30% of easiness, or let's say 40% of easiness, and you will have around 60% of medium nature of questions in it. So let's get started. The very first question, a very straightforward question. Now in my classes, I've been telling the students that whenever you read any index or any report, any index, you should know what that index is all about, who brings it, what are the parameters, and what does it lack, how it can improve. That has been the thing that you do. It suffices your prelims as well as your mains preparation, and now UPSC has used exactly that same idea to ask you a question in which they have asked you to distinguish between the Human Development Index, that is HDI, which is brought out by United Nations Development Program, and the inequality adjusted human development index, that is IHDI. So whatever HDI is calculated for that country, they see what is the inequality, right? And for that inequality, they adjust the human development index. That is what it is, with special reference to India. So we have to talk about in general, but special focus to India. So 80 to 90% of India related thing you will write, maybe 10 to 20% of generic thing could be mentioned over here, right? And a full stop. Then you will talk about why is IHDI considered a better indicator of inclusive growth. See, again, the word inclusive growth is involved. Since the last 3 years, the question paper is directly mentioning the word inclusive growth. It is mentioned in your syllabus. It is one of the most important micro topics of your GS3 Indian economy, right? So there are 2 parts to the question. Now this question is of 10 marks. So 2 parts are there. So in the 2 part, the first part, generally what happens is the first part is the smaller one with less weightage, but that may not necessarily be the case here. It looks more of a 50-50, or rather 60-40 percentage is what I will say. So you will first have to understand the weightage between the 2 different sections of the question, and within that what the weightage you will give. And here, since there are 2 parts, you have a lot to write, but just 150 words. Please do not keep on writing 20-25 words for your introduction. Your attacking of the question itself will become your introduction. So the introduction will be as good as starting to address the question. So directly start with the difference. So your introduction is going to attack the question wherein you can talk about the differences between human development index and inequality adjusted human development index. Here you don't have to write it is brought out by UNDP, this, that, and it is how it is calculated. Please do not write that. It's not needed at all. The question has set a platform at a very higher level. Don't bring it down. Keep it at that level and take off from that level. So start by telling the difference between HDI and ISDI. Give an example over there, right? And you distinguish it with respect to special emphasis to India. So you talk about the gender inequality that is there, how much it is there, so how it is going to impact the ISDI, right? India's HDI is going to reduce, ISDI is going to be lesser because there is inequality. So you explain all that in the main body. Then you talk about why IHDI is considered to be better than HDI. Why? Because see, HDI can be higher, people can have higher per capita income, rich can have more and more, and there will be a lot of people who will have very less. So high HDI would still be there, but that country would still have very high inequality. But if you consider IHDI, it takes into consideration the inequality that exists so as to give a real picture of development. Your HDI will give you the growth that is there, but IHDI is going to give you the actual development picture, is what you are going to talk about. And then when you conclude, you mention, however, both HDI, it is a starting point. However, HDI and ISDI both are a helpful indicator for various policy decision in order to distribute the profits fairly for inclusive growth. Something like that, in a positive way, you can conclude your answer. Be very clear with respect to words. Write very less, very clear pointers you can write, and avoid too big introduction and conclusion. In fact, directly start addressing the question because there is a lot to write and less words. Moving on to the next question. Now, this during the classes I've been saying that it is very important, the foreign trade agreements, the multilateral, bilateral trade agreements that are going on, the universal trade agreements that are already there like WTO, etc. So these topics are very important because recently India is negotiating a lot with various countries and groups for trade agreements, and instead of asking next year, this year itself they have started asking it. So what is the question here? What are the challenges before Indian economy when the world is moving away from free trade and multilateralism to protectionism and bilateralism? Means the countries, free trade would have been what? Reducing your tariffs. But what is happening? Protectionism is happening. Protectionism is what? Increasing your tariffs. And this is in regard specifically, this is being done by USA, so you also have to counter that, right? And multilateralism is also going down because there are a lot of delays if so many countries are involved. So rather we go with bilateralism because just one country, the decisions could be swift. However, as we have seen, that is not necessarily the case. All right. So let's get back to the questions. What are the challenges before the Indian economy when the world is moving from free trade and multilateralism to protectionism and bilateralism? So a question mark. How can these challenges be met? Means how can you address these challenges? So directly from the introduction, start addressing the answer. Do not waste your words in writing big introductions, etc. I hope that is absolutely clear. So directly start about addressing this particular thing as to what are the challenges that India is particularly facing with respect to the world moving away from free trade and multilateralism. Right. So what happens is, when free trade agreements, multilateralism will be there, like-minded countries can come together and create certain pressures. Now, since protectionism is there, the countries which are already developed have huge soft power and hard power is going to dominate it. And since bilateralism is there, with each country you will have to have different agreements. So it can create a lot of time because you are agreeing with one country at a time, and there are a lot of conflict that is going on around the world. So secondary sanctions, etc. also come into the picture. As in case of India, you give the example of secondary sanction imposed by USA on India for trading with Russia. So you are going to show the USA, Russia and India concern that is going on, right? So this is what you're going to talk about. Now, how can these challenges be met? So here you talk about a bit of positive over here with respect to bilateralism and how you can address those challenges by bringing in the like-minded countries together. You are also taking it as an advantage, because when you are dealing with bilaterally, you hold certain advantages because certain other countries can benefit in multilateralism. Imagine in a multilateralism there is a country like China and India is also there, plus European Union or some other countries are there. India might be willing to give certain benefits to European Union but not to China, because China is a massive exporter. So that can be a hindrance over here, which can be like a solution in your bilateral ties. You talk about in bilateral trade agreements, generally in trade agreements the trade of goods is considered, but do mention that India can focus its exceptional you can say exceptional performance in the service sector in each and every bilateral trade that it takes ahead. So all these solutions you have to talk about to address these challenges. Once done, India can, you can conclude by on a positive note talking about, because India currently has a current account surplus, so India can further increase its current account surplus, right? So something like that could be your conclusion. So this is how you can basically conclude your answer. I hope that is absolutely clear, right? Let's move ahead. Question number 3. Now, since in a sequential order it's coming, question number 3 again of economy. It talks about explain the factors influencing the decision of the farmers on the selection of high value crops. Now, this is as simple as talking about the factors that decides what crop does a farmer grow, but they have made it specific by talking about high value crops. So what are high value crops? High value crops are your horticultural crops. You have your fruits, vegetables, floriculture, etc. Plus you may also talk about other various cash crops as well. These are high value crops. So what are going to be the deciding factor for selection of high value crops is what you have to mention. Now your introduction here could be what, on the lines of that the high value crops, specifically focusing on floriculture, horticultural crops, have a very high wastage. Thus selection or choice of the high value crops becomes very, very important. Something like this you can introduce, and then you can talk about the factors that are going to decide as to what based on what the farmers are going to decide what crop to grow. So here, since these are high value crops, there is high risk, high reward kind of a thing, and these crops are more susceptible to the weather, climate change. So you are going to talk about the climate change, you are going to talk about the weather condition, you are going to talk about the availability of water, availability of irrigation, availability or presence of rainfall, the type of soil. All these things will remain same in general also, but the hierarchy or the preference would change. So here, this is what you're going to talk about. Then also, are there MSPs as such in fruits and vegetables and all? MSP as such is not there. So you can then talk about the storage facility, the availability of the storage facility, especially the cold storage facility in general, cold storage facility in particular, right? The market that is there, the demand and supply, the basics of Indian economy is going to be talked about over here. And each factor you don't have to just list down, you will explain. So you will have to give example in each of them, right? So this is what you are going to talk about. Now this introduction was 15 words. Your conclusion, which will give you solution, will be of 15 words. You are left with 120 words. So around 100 words will be this explanation, 20 words will talk about certain challenges that are there, and then last 15 to 20 words will conclude the answer with your solution. I hope that is clear. Correct. Let's move on to the next one. Next one talks about elaborate the scope and significance of supply chain management of agricultural commodities in India. Now remember, at the beginning I said that some amount of facts are required. So to tell about the scope, the facts are required. You have to talk about the scope and significance of supply chain management of agricultural commodities in India. So you have to talk about certain facts, and your answer can be introduced with the help of facts. For example, only around 10% of the total agricultural produce is actually processed, right? So value addition is not much. You can also introduce by talking about 20 more than 20% of the horticultural crops or high value crops are going for a wastage. So this is going to set a tone as to what is the scope of the supply chain management that is needed. Then comes your main body, which talks about in detail the requirement of supply chain, the scope of supply chain, right? So this can you further elaborate over here. Then you talk about the significance. What is the significance of this? When you have when you do this, you will lead to doubling of, helps in doubling the farmer income, increase let's say employment, better price realization would be this part, increase employment, reduce inequality, right? Adds to the GDP of agriculture, so on and so forth. However, of course, there would be certain challenges in this regard. What are the challenges? Lack of infrastructure, lack of finances, and then you talk about the solution of that. This will be very brief. Keep this thing very brief. The elaboration should be done over here. So around 100 words would be used about here. I hope that's absolutely clear. Moving ahead to the next question. Now question 1, 2, 3, 4 all are 10 markers. Moving on, then directly you have question number 11, which is a 15 marker question. This question says that explain how fiscal health index. So here you should know what fiscal health index is. You should know what are the criteria based on which this fiscal health index is brought out. So this is another factual thing that you should know. They are not asking generally the fiscal health. They are asking with respect to fiscal health index, which consists of certain criteria that we will discuss, the revenue generation of the state, so on and so forth. Now the question is, explain how the fiscal health index can be used as a tool for assessing what? The fiscal performance of the states in India. The fiscal performance of the state in India. Now that is the first part. The second part is, in what way would it encourage the states to adopt prudent and sustainable fiscal policies? So there are basically two parts of it. First part talks about how fiscal health index can be used as a tool for what? Not addressing any issue, but tool for assessing the performance. All right, I hope that is clear. That's the first part. The second part is, in what way would it encourage? So ways in which encourage, it encourages the state to adopt prudent plus the sustainable. It should be prudent plus it should be sustainable. It should be sustainable fiscal policies. So this is what the understanding of the question is. I hope that's clear. So let's get started with respect to it. Now here in the introduction, you can talk about the criteria that are there, the factors that are there present in the fiscal health index. Now generally I tell the students to avoid just simply defining unless and until the question simply asks for it directly. If the question directly asks what is fiscal health index, you definitely have to tell. Else try to find out better things, better facts, current affairs related linkages, etc. Right? That is required. But here what happens, and so why? Because better introduction helps your answer, and in certain questions when you are not getting any introduction, defining that particular thing and moving ahead would be the easiest way forward, which will anyhow you will do in 8 to 10 questions. So when you practice for good introduction. That does not mean if you're not finding good introduction, waste your time. Please don't do it. Then you define or write an introduction and simply move ahead. But here, not defining as such, but talking about the criteria of fiscal health index is important, because then you are going to utilize those criteria for assessing the fiscal performance of the different states. So here in the introduction, directly talk about the criteria that is there. For example, the revenue that is generated by the states, the efficiency with which it is generated, the dependency of the states dependency of the state on the central pools of funds through the finance commission, so on and so forth. So mention all these points in the introduction itself. Then you can directly attack in the main body, talking about how these parameters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are actually going to help assess the performance of the states. So how does this help, this help, this help is what you're going to talk about. Now the question is, in what ways would it encourage the states to adopt prudent and sustainable policies? So it is now going to talk about the encouragement, how the encouragement is going to come. So first talk about it is a cooperative federalism, or sorry, competitive federalism. You talk about the competitive federalism because you are ranking the state under that. Then you talk about the finance commission devolution can be based on that, which is based on that. So it helps the states to do better so as to get more funds from the central pool through the finance commission's horizontal devolution of the taxes. So this is how the encouragement can be brought in. And then you can talk about, in the last 30 words or 40 words, 20 words can talk about certain challenges, and the remaining 20 words can be your conclusion. I hope that's clear. So this is how you address this particular question. Let's move ahead to the next question. Question number 12. Question number 12 talks about discuss the rationale, means the logic. What is the rationality behind it? Discuss the rationale of the product linked incentive scheme. Now here you also have to know what is this product linked incentive scheme, in what things they are there. See, product linked incentive scheme is a scheme which is present in various domains. It is present in your electric vehicles. It is present, it has to be extended in certain sectors, but in certain sectors it already exists. So you should know those 10, 15. Now you don't have to write all the 10, 15, but a couple of sectors you have to mention over there, right? So here a bit of generic fact you have to know. Generic facts are required to be known, right? But it gets more specific. What is the specificity? What are its achievements? So when you're talking about its achievement, you should know about its achievement specifically. So again, it is factual. It is way more factual now. I hope that's clear. In what way can the functioning and the outcome of the scheme can be improved? So this is also a main part. There are 3 parts. So first, main body will have 3 parts. One is the rationale that you have to give. Number 2 is your achievements that you have to give, right? Number 3 is what way the functioning and outcomes, functioning plus outcomes, how it can be improved is what they have asked, right? So introduction can directly talk about what the lacunae were, directly talk about the lacunae, the voids that existed, so that from the main body you can directly start addressing the rationale of the scheme, right? The rationale. Then you talk about a bit of achievements, right? Then before talking about the function and outcome, how it can be improved, talk about the challenges that are there. Now this is basically it's a 15 marker, so this may have around, let's say 5 to 6 marks, right? Achievements could also have around 4 to 5 marks. And then how it can be improved, again 4 to 5 marks, right? So almost similar, or you can say 4, 5 or 6 marks can be over here as well. So when you are writing your 20-25 words over here, your 20 words in conclusion, so you are left with 200 words. So you can have around 75 words over here, because you will have to discuss, explain, and around 50 words over here, and another 70 words are there. So 50 words are going to go in how to improve, and 25 words you can use in your challenges, mentioning about the challenges. So this is how you can address this particular answer. In rationale, you are going to talk about the lacunae that existed, the processing which was which was not much, and certain sector which needs a push, for example the electric vehicle, the renewable energy, excuse me, plus specifically this case of solar energy. You talk about that. When you talk about achievement, you talk about how there has been growth in this, how there has been growth in renewable energy. You talk about that the renewable energy now forms more than 50% of the total, not renewable energy as such, non-fossil fuel renewable energy is the part of it. So that has played a big role. Let's talk about specific in solar energy, how the improvement has been, but then talk about certain challenges that exist, for example the infrastructure development, delays, etc., and then talk about how it can be improved, and finally conclude your answers. I hope that is clear. Moving ahead to the next question. It talks about to examine the scope of the scope of the food processing industries in India. So since they are asking scope, some amount of generic factual knowledge is required over here. Elaborate the measures taken by the government in the food processing industry. Measures taken by the government in the food processing industries for generating employment opportunities. So very important. What is the issue that the aspirants are going to make over here? They are simply going to talk about the measures taken by the government in food processing industries randomly, but it is being asked specifically for generating environments or generating employment. So restrict your government measures, specific focus on employment. I hope that is absolutely clear. And the first part, I have been saying this, that first part usually used to be a smaller part, but here that is not the case. We are seeing that the first part is also holding an important weightage over here and is also analytical in nature. So you will have sort of 50-50 weightage over here as well. So you can talk about the introduction, how there is a huge potential in this food processing sector, and then you can talk about the scope. You can mention something like only 10% of the produce is actually processed. So you talk about the scope, you talk about the scope of increasing the GDP, the scope of reduction in wastages, the scope of, these are all growth related points, but then link it to the development. It is going to lead to development. So how further developmental scope is also present over here. You mention all these things in detail with facts, figures, and examples. I hope that's clear. Then you move ahead with the second part. Elaborate the measures taken by the government in food processing industries for generating employment. So you talk about the Sampada Yojana. You should be knowing this. You talk about the government's mega food parks through hub and spoke model and various other schemes, how they are leading to employment generation. And in brief, you can also mention that they are addressing various other issues as well. However, there are certain challenges in front of it, and you talk about the solutions to those challenges. So it is as simple as that. The question is not that difficult to understand and address, but some amount of factual knowledge should be there. For example, the knowledge about the Sampada Yojana, the knowledge about the mega food parks, certain facts about how much is actually being processed, how much it is not, in order to write the scope as well. I hope that is absolutely clear. So again, as we said in the beginning, certain amount of factual knowledge is required to address this question. Right. So as you can see, the economy paper was not that difficult, right? But agriculture and the allied activities, including food management and food processing, takes the chunk, and half of the paper is directly from there. So again, it plays a very, very important role. But the questions were very direct, not difficult to understand, but important with respect to having certain amount of factual knowledge. So how can you basically prepare yourself for such kind of questions? with respect to the micro topics that are mentioned in the syllabus of economy or any paper for that matter, keep certain pages of file or something in which micro topic wise certain facts you should write which are ready made for you as fodder to be used in your answer. So that is one big learning we should have in our upcoming UPSC mains examination, probably of course for the next year now, because the people giving here would be preparing for their remaining papers, right? So for others, please keep in mind that have certain folders. It is absolutely advised for your essays, etc., for your ethics, but also for GS 123, where you can directly utilize that folder to write the answer, without which your answer would not have much substantiation or concrete backing. I hope that's clear. So thank you once again. I hope you have learned a lot from it. You can write the answers to it, send it across to us. We will give you feedback specifically for the answers that you have written. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Legacy IAS Academy. In today's video, we are going to discuss GS Paper 3 environment related questions that came in Mains 2025. So let us begin with the question. The first question was regarding carbon capture and utilization, that is CCUS. Okay? Carbon capture and utilization and storage. Okay? So this has been into news for a long period of time now, given that so many countries have put up so many efforts for carbon sequestration. So if I talk about the basics कि carbon sequestration या carbon capture को कैसे किया ही जाता है, how do we do this? This is largely done in the form of geological sinks. So geological sinks is कहने का मतलब that we capture the carbon and feed it back inside the earth's crust. One is a geological sink. Second option is oceanic sink. ठीक है? So in oceans also we are capturing the carbon and dumping it. ठीक है? So ये जो geological and ocean sink था, इसे हमें explain करने की जरूरत थी. What is carbon capture, utilization and storage? तो बेसिकली वी आर ट्राइंग टू कैप्चर द कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड, ठीक है, इसे ईदर यूटिलाइज कर लेना चाह रहे हैं या फिर स्टोर कर लेना चाह रहे हैं, ठीक है. सो इट इज एन इंडस्ट्रियल केमिकल ऑल्सो. कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड का बहुत सारा एप्लीकेशन है इन इंडस्ट्रीज. कार्बन मोनोऑक्साइड विथ हाइड्रोजन का बहुत सारा इम्प्लीकेशन है, यूजेस है इन इंडस्ट्री. दिस इज नोन एज सिंक गैस, CO+H2. दिस इज सिंक गैस. तो बहुत सारा एप्लीकेशंस हो सकता है कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड का. फॉर दैट मैटर फर्टिलाइजेशन, मतलब एफॉरेस्टेशन में भी कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड कैन आल्सो बी अब्सॉर्ब, ठीक है. So what are the options that we have? What is the potential role of CCUS, that is carbon capture and utilization and storage in tackling climate change? तो पहले हम लोग ये जान लें कि इसका ऑप्शंस क्या क्या है. एक जियोलॉजिकल सिंक है. जियोलॉजिकल सिंक मतलब ईदर इन द फॉर्म ऑफ गैस और मिक्स्ड विद अ लिक्विड, यू कैन फीड इट बैक इनटू द अर्थ सरफेस. या ओशंस में यू कैन ऐड इन आयरन पेलेट्स, और आयरन पेलेट्स भी ये कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड को होल्ड करने के लिए रेस्पॉन्सिबल होंगे. एडिशनली afforestation can also be one of the simplest solution for carbon capture, utilization and storage. Now talking about कि इसका क्या potential है in tackling the climate change. Now we know that if I talk about some of the gases which are most responsible for climate change, this is carbon dioxide, then it is also comprising of methane and nitrous oxide, ठीक है. इसके अलावा भी 3 और gases हैं, but ये बहुत ज्यादा, although their potential is very high but their presence is not as high. ये इन तीनों का प्रेजेंस ही बहुत ज्यादा है. सो दैट इज व्हाई दिस इज वेरी मच प्रॉब्लमैटिक. तो व्हेन वी से कार्बन कैप्चर, यूटिलाइजेशन एंड स्टोरेज, वी लार्जली आर फोकसिंग ऑन कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड. तो ये क्वेश्चन पूछ रहा है कि इसका क्या कैपेसिटी है दैट वी विल बी एबल टू टैकल द क्लाइमेट चेंज. नाउ दिस इज इटसेल्फ अ ग्रीन हाउस गैस. तो you will have to explain briefly कि greenhouse gas is responsible for holding the reflected rays from the earth's surface. So because it is holding the reflected rays, these are responsible for trapping that heat. और वो trapping of heat की वजह से there is a rise in temperature. Now if we are somehow able to reduce their presence in atmosphere, we will be able to bring down the global rise in temperature, at least decelerate this pace. ठीक है? So they have a good potential in tackling the climate change. Okay, so in introduction you should have written about CCUS, what is carbon capture, utilization and storage, and in body you should have mentioned about the options to carry out this. In body itself you will also have to mention about the potential, because it is consisting of CO2 sequestration, CO2 absorption, तो इसलिए this, and CO2 is largely responsible for greenhouse gas emissions, or largely responsible for increasing the global temperature. So if we capture this CO2, reduce their presence in atmosphere, तो we will be able to reduce the pace of climate change as well. ठीक है? So that is what should have been mentioned in the body. Now talking about the conclusion part, कि इसके conclusion में क्या क्या mention किया जा सकता था. So different options, different countries have taken out different options, different solutions. For example, geological sinks have been carried out by European nations. France has created an oceanic sink as well. तो बहुत सारे कंट्रीज बहुत सारा जियोलॉजिकल और ओशियनिक सिंक्स क्रिएट कर रहे हैं. जियोलॉजिकल सिंक्स लार्जली यूरोपियन नेशन कंट्रीज में है जिनका वाटर के साथ कांटेक्ट कम है, और जब बहुत सारे ऐसे कंट्रीज हैं उनका जियोलॉजिकल सिंक्स बन रहा है. फ्रांस इन टर्न हैज ओपनड अप सम ऑफ द ओशियनिक सिंक्स. ठीक है, सो दिस कुड हैव बीन पार्ट ऑफ योर आंसर. नाउ moving on to the next question, that is talking about sea water intrusion. Sea water intrusion in the coastal aquifer is a major concern in India. ठीक है, so basically ये क्या कहना चाह रहा है कि sea water जो है वो हमारे aquifers में घुस जा रहा है. Aquifer कहने का मतलब we are talking about ground water. ठीक है, coastal aquifer कहने का मतलब the ground water remaining close to coast. इन सभी areas में, let's say चेन्नई, मुंबई, कोलकाता, ये सारे एरियाज में when you extract the sea water, that itself, when you extract the ground water, that is itself tasting saline in nature. Why is it so? क्योंकि sea water का intrusion हो गया है इन सभी एरियाज में. So they are asking what are the causes of sea water intrusion and the remedial measures to combat this hazard. So sea water intrusion का causes क्या हो सकता है? क्योंकि आप ground water बहुत ज्यादा extract कर लिए हो. So this is the ग्राउंड वाटर. अब ग्राउंड वाटर का डिप्लीशन इतना ज्यादा हो गया है कि बाहर से सी से वो पानी अंदर चला आ रहा है टू फिल दैट ग्राउंड वाटर बेसिकली. ठीक है, सो इफ यू हैव टू राइट दिस आंसर कि व्हाट आर द कॉजेस, ये तो प्रिंसिपल कॉज है. ठीक है, बट इफ आई हैव टू एड्रेस दिस इन द फॉर्म ऑफ क्वेश्चन, तो यू विल हैव टू फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल राइट इन इंट्रोडक्शन. दिस वाज अ 10 मार्क क्वेश्चन. So you had to write about कि what is a sea water intrusion. So in the coastal aquifer कहाँ देखा जा सकता है? Expectedly mostly the million plus cities staying at the coast. So कहाँ हो सकता है? ये विशाखापट्टनम हो सकता है, चेन्नई, मुंबई, कोलकाता में हो सकता है. ठीक है, so those areas which are close to coast and are encountering this kind of problem, मतलब close to coast और see groundwater depletion बहुत ज्यादा हो गया है. So there must be a million plus city largely. तो ग्राउंड वाटर इंक्लूजन, ग्राउंड वाटर एक्सट्रैक्शन ज्यादा हो जाएगा इन दोज एरियाज वी आर विटनेसिंग द सी वाटर इंट्रूजन. ठीक है, सो ये व्हाट यू हैड टू मेंशन अबाउट व्हाट इज सी वाटर इंट्रूजन और कौन कौन से एरियाज में हम लोग एक्सपीरियंस कर रहे हैं. नाउ मूविंग इनटू द बॉडी पार्ट कि व्हाट आर द कॉजेज ऑफ सी वाटर इंट्रूजन. सो मोस्ट कॉमनली इट इज ग्राउंड वाटर डिप्लीशन. ठीक है, ग्राउंड वाटर डिप्लीशन, एक्सट्रैक्शन, ये सारे प्रिंसिपल रीजंस हो सकते हैं. बट अपार्ट फ्रॉम दिस माइनिंग कैन ऑल्सो बी वन ऑफ द रीजन. फॉर एग्जाम्पल इंडस्ट्री रिलेटेड ग्राउंड वाटर एक्सट्रैक्शन और इंडस्ट्री रिलेटेड पॉल्यूशन कैन ऑल्सो बी वन ऑफ द रीजन, क्योंकि कंटामिनेटेड वाटर हो गया है, दैट हैज इंक्रीज द डेंसिटी, वो सारे पानी सेटल कर गए हैं. सो दैट हैज अलाउड द सी वाटर टू एंटर इनटू द लैंड मास एरियाज. तो बेसिकली ये क्यों हो पा रहा है? क्योंकि ग्राउंड वाटर का डिप्लीशन हो जा रहा है, तो बाहर से सी वाटर एंटर कर रहा है. अब इसका जो भी रीजन रिस्पॉन्सिबल हो, एग्रीकल्चर कैन बी रीजन रिस्पॉन्सिबल, डोमेस्टिक इंडस्ट्री, गवर्नेंस, पुअर गवर्नेंस कैन बी द फैक्टर्स रिस्पॉन्सिबल, but this is the primary reason for intrusion of sea water into the coastal aquifers. So what is the solution? What is the remedial measure? तो इसका solution क्या हो सकता है? That we will have to deal with the ground water depletion itself. ground water का जो excessive extraction हो रहा है, इसी को हम लोग को resolve करने की जरूरत है. तो अगर मान लेते हैं कि it's a million plus city, we have very well understood कि million plus cities में unplanned urbanization हुआ है. So unplanned urbanization में it is very very important that we need to declare some dark zones. Dark zone कहने का मतलब कि we will not be extracting water from these areas, क्योंकि यहाँ पे ground water extraction बहुत ज्यादा हो गया है. ठीक है, और for that matter we will also have to work towards rainwater harvesting और groundwater recharge. ठीक है, ट्रेडिशनल स्ट्रक्चर से वी विल हैव टू पुट अप बाउलीज या वेल्स, इस तरीके के स्ट्रक्चर्स हमें डालने की जरूरत है, जो कि रेन वाटर अगर आ रहा है तो इसे फीडबैक कर सके हम लोग ग्राउंड में. वन मोर ऑप्शन इज डेवलपमेंट ऑफ स्पॉन्ज सिटीज. स्पॉन्ज सिटीज कहने का मतलब ये वो सेंटर्स होते हैं, अर्बन सेंटर्स में ये वो एरियाज होते हैं जहां यू विल फाइंड ब्लू ग्रीन इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, फॉरेस्ट रहेगा या फिर वाटर बॉडीज रहेंगे. और क्योंकि वाटर बॉडी किसी भी तरीके का पॉन्ड या लेक जो होता है, दे हैव अ कांटेक्ट विद द ग्राउंड वाटर, सो दिस हेल्प्स अस, डेवलपमेंट ऑफ वेटलैंड, दिस हेल्प्स अस टू रिचार्ज द ग्राउंड वाटर. So development of wetland, sponge cities, or for that matter blue green infrastructure, these can be some of the remedial measures फॉर रिस्टोरिंग रिचार्जिंग द ग्राउंड वाटर, और ये है हमारे उस प्रॉब्लम को भी रिजॉल्व कर देगा कि सी वाटर इन सारे कोस्टल एक्विफर्स में एंटर कर रहा है. ठीक है. So you can write about any of these solutions. You can also mention in conclusion कि गवर्नमेंट ने ऑलरेडी कुछ स्टेप्स ले लिए हैं. ठीक है. फॉर एग्जाम्पल अटल भूजल योजना वी हैव ऑलरेडी डन. ठीक है. बट इसमें से कुछ और मेजर्स भी लेने की जरूरत है. वी नीड टू टेक सम लेसन्स फ्रॉम द इंटरनेशनल कम्युनिटी. फॉर एग्जाम्पल Israel has made use of saline water to carry out to be used in agriculture, or for that matter China, they have shifted towards brown water in agriculture. तो ये सारे हमें इंटरनेशनल एग्जांपल्स यूज करने की जरूरत है. वी नीड टू एम्प्लॉय दीज बेस्ट प्रैक्टिसेस सो दैट जो हमारे पास अवेलेबल वाटर प्रेजेंस है ग्राउंड वाटर का, उसमें हम लोग उसका यूज के एफिशिएंसी को इम्प्रूव कर सकें. ठीक है. सो दिस कुड हैव बीन योर कंक्लूजन. नाउ मूविंग ऑन टू द नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन, that is, examine the factors responsible for depleting the groundwater in India. What are the steps taken by the government to mitigate such depletion of groundwater? अब ग्राउंड वाटर के डिप्लीशन के लिए बहुत सारे मेजर्स रेस्पॉन्सिबल हैं. ग्राउंड वाटर का डिप्लीशन हमारे एग्रीकल्चर में सबसे ज्यादा हुआ है, क्योंकि एग्रीकल्चर इज रेस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर कंजम्पशन ऑफ 87% ऑफ द टोटल ग्राउंड वाटर. इसके बाद डोमेस्टिक सेक्टर इंपॉर्टेंट है, क्योंकि डोमेस्टिक सेक्टर इज रेस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर 11% ऑफ ग्राउंड वाटर कंजम्पशन. और लास्टली इंडस्ट्रीज रेस्पॉन्सिबल है, क्योंकि दे आर रेस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर कंजम्पशन ऑफ 2% ऑफ ग्राउंड वाटर. ठीक है. सो यू कुड हैव बिगन विद दिस काइंड ऑफ डेटा इन इंट्रोडक्शन कि हमारा ग्राउंड वाटर यूजेज इतना ज्यादा है. इंडिया, यू कैन ऑल्सो राइट इन इंट्रोडक्शन दैट इंडिया इज वन सच कंट्री जो कि एग्रीकल्चर में ग्राउंड वाटर यूजेज का हाईएस्ट कंज्यूमर है. ठीक है. सो इंडिया एंड चाइना आर वन सच कंट्रीज हु आर ओवरऑल हाईएस्ट कंज्यूमर्स ऑफ ग्राउंड वाटर, बट एग्रीकल्चर में हाईएस्ट कंजम्पशन इंडिया का हो रहा है. Any of these data can be part of your introduction. Now, why are these sectors responsible for huge amount of groundwater consumption? जैसे agriculture में it is MSP. तो हम लोगों ने so far अब तक MSP सबसे ज्यादा राइस को दिया, wheat को दिया, शुगर केन को दिया, जिसकी वजह से इस तरीके के वाटर गजलिंग क्रॉप्स, राइस या शुगर केन जैसे वाटर गजलिंग क्रॉप्स ज्यादा कल्टीवेट हुए. सो दैट क्रिएटेड द प्रॉब्लम ऑफ एक्सेसिव ग्राउंड वाटर एक्सट्रैक्शन. एक प्रॉब्लम एग्रीकल्चर में और भी रहा, दैट इज एनर्जी सब्सिडी. So we have given subsidy to the farmers to extract the groundwater. आपको सस्ता में बिजली मिलेगा, आप उस बिजली को यूज करके पानी को एक्सट्रैक्ट कीजिएगा. But that has led to soil salination, over irrigation and soil salination. Over irrigation is also the result of HYV seeds and green revolution. तो क्योंकि green revolution और HYV seeds have demanded more fertilizer, so as a consequence of this, that has demanded more amount of water as well. ठीक है. Now talking about domestic sector has led to unplanned urbanization. या फिर domestic sector में एक और problem है by the name Indian Easement Act. Indian Easement Act is a colonial law. 1886 का law है जो कहता है कि if you own a piece of land, you also own the total amount of groundwater beneath that. But how do you ensure this? एक 20-story building है, ये अपने नीचे के ground water को सिर्फ अपने ही नीचे के ground water को use करेगी. How do we ensure this? So there is a law but no enforceability of this law. ठीक है. इंडस्ट्रीज के साथ प्रॉब्लम ये है कि दे आर ईदर कैरिंग आउट थर्मल पोल्यूशन और पोल्यूशन ऑफ द ग्राउंड वाटर इटसेल्फ. ठीक है. सो दिस हैज आल्सो बीन वन ऑफ द फैक्टर फॉर ग्राउंड वाटर डिप्लीशन. नाउ व्हाट आर द स्टेप्स टेकन बाय द गवर्नमेंट? तो इस प्रॉब्लम को हम लोगों ने रिजॉल्व किया. अब हम लोग हाईएस्ट एमएसपी ज्वार के लिए देते हैं. ठीक है. या फॉर दैट मैटर कुछ मिलेट्स के लिए देते हैं. वी डोंट गिव इट हाईएस्ट फॉर राइस. ठीक है. एनर्जी सब्सिडी में भी वी हैव रिप्लेस्ड इट यूजिंग पीएम कुसुम स्कीम. PM Kusum scheme में we have given them solar pumps. The agriculturalists, the farmers have been given solar pumps कि आप इस पंप को एक्सट्रैक्ट करके एनर्जी यूज करके पानी एक्सट्रैक्ट कीजिए. जो भी आप एक्स्ट्रा एनर्जी यूटिलाइज कर रहे हो, जनरेट कर रहे हो, दैट यू कैन सेल इट ऑफ टू द ग्रिड. ठीक है. HYV सीड से भी दूर जाने लगे. अब हम लोग ऑर्गेनिक फार्मिंग को प्रमोट कर रहे हैं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल परंपरागत कृषि विकास योजना या ZBNF. These are some of the government measures that we have taken for to mitigate this kind of depletion of groundwater. ठीक है. So ये हमारे कंक्लूजन का पार्ट हो सकता था. So far the steps that government has taken. अब जो आपका सजेशन हो सकता है, it can be anything as we discussed, spawn cities, blue green infrastructure, development of traditional water harvesting structures. ये सब कुछ भी हमारे कंक्लूजन का पार्ट हो सकता था. ठीक है. Now moving on to the next question. That is, mineral resources are fundamental to the country's economy and these are exploited by mining. Why is mining considered as an environmental hazard? Explain the remedial measures required to reduce environmental hazard due to mining. ठीक है. सो माइनिंग के बहुत सारे एनवायरमेंटल हजार्ड्स हो सकते हैं, जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल इसका एयर पोल्यूशन से प्रॉब्लम बढ़ सकता है, इनका पानी में जो ये लोग रिलीज करते हैं दैट इज एसिड्स, ये हेवी मेटल टॉक्सिक पोल्यूटेंट्स रिलीज कर सकते हैं सच एज कैडमियम, आर्सेनिक, ठीक है, या फिर लेड, ठीक है, या इस तरीके के, या फिर निकल, इस तरीके के हेवी मेटल का कंटामिनेशन हो सकता है, एयर में कंटामिनेशन हो सकता है, वाटर में भी कंटामिनेशन हो सकता है। सो किसी भी तरीके का जो आप माइनिंग एक्सट्रैक्शन कैरी करते हो, जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल कोल का एयर में एक प्रॉब्लम होता है कि दिस लीड्स टू कोल डस्ट प्रेजेंस इन एयर, कोल माइनिंग लीड्स टू कोल डस्ट इन एयर, और जो लोग इस सेक्टर में काम कर रहे हैं दैट दे सफर फ्रॉम सम प्रॉब्लम कॉल्ड कोलियोसिस, ठीक है। कोलियोसिस इज बेसिकली द डेपोजिशन ऑफ कोल डस्ट इनसाइड द लंग्स, तो हमारे एल्वियोलर सैक का स्पेस कम हो जाता है एंड ओवर पीरियड ऑफ टाइम देयर विल बी लैक ऑफ ब्रीदेबिलिटी, जो सांस लेने की कैपेसिटी है दैट रिड्यूसेस ओवर अ पीरियड ऑफ टाइम, ठीक है। सो कोलियोसिस हो सकते हैं, एस्बेस्टस के माइनिंग और एस्बेस्टस के इंडस्ट्रीज में काम करने वाले लोगों को एस्बेस्टोसिस हो सकता है, ठीक है। सो दिस इज द प्रॉब्लम ऑल इन एयर। वाटर में ऑब्वियसली आप किस तरीके का कंटामिनेंट्स रिलीज कर रहे हो दैट कैन बी अ प्रॉब्लम। एनवायरमेंटल हजार्ड में सॉरी TPPs, thermal power plants, they create a problem called thermal pollution. तो पानी के टेम्परेचर, अपने आसपास के पानी के टेम्परेचर को बढ़ा देते हैं, ठीक है। फॉर दैट मैटर डिफरेंट किसी भी तरीके का जो मिनरल एक्सट्रैक्शन होता है, फॉर एग्जांपल झारसुगुड़ा इज वन सच प्लेस जो हमारे इंट्रोडक्शन का एग्जांपल हो सकता था। झारसुगुड़ा, दिस इज अ प्लेस इन झारखंड यूरेनियम एक्सट्रैक्शन के लिए, known for uranium extraction, but unfortunately there is no child that has been born healthy in this town for a very long period of time. बच्चों के पास either they are born with either one eye, single nostril, single ear, इस तरीके के जेनेटिक इश्यूज होते हैं बिकॉज ऑफ यूरेनियम एक्सट्रैक्शन, ठीक है। सो यूरेनियम एक्सट्रैक्शन की वजह से दिस प्लेस हैज बिकम वन ऑफ द मोस्ट इनफेमस प्लेसेस। सो माइनिंग की वजह से एक एनवायरमेंटल हजार्ड हो सकता है, वो एयर में भी हो सकता है, वाटर में भी हो सकता है, ग्राउंड वाटर कंटामिनेशन यूरेनियम से भी हो सकता है, फॉर दैट मैटर फ्लोराइड कंटामिनेशन भी हो सकता है, आर्सेनिक कंटामिनेशन भी हो सकता है, ठीक है। क्योंकि ग्राउंड वाटर के एक्सेसिव एक्सट्रैक्शन या आर्सेनिक के एक्सट्रैक्शन की वजह से, माइनिंग की वजह से आर्सेनिक कैन रिमेन इनटू ग्राउंड वाटर एंड दैट विल लीड टू वेरियस प्रॉब्लम्स। मेलानोसिस हो सकता है, केटानोसिस हो सकता है, ब्लैक फुट डिजीज हो सकता है, गैंग्रीन हो सकता है, देयर कैन बी सो मेनी डिजीजेस दैट कैन बी अराइजिंग आउट ऑफ दीज कंटामिनेंट्स, ठीक है। सो व्हाट आर द रेमेडियल मेजर्स रिक्वायर्ड टू रिड्यूस द एनवायरमेंटल हजार्ड, क्योंकि इंडस्ट्रियल पोल्यूशन है, बिकॉज वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट इंडस्ट्रियल पोल्यूशन, तो ये पोल्यूशन ईदर माइनिंग की वजह से नॉन पॉइंट हो सकता है या रिफाइनरीज की वजह से पॉइंट सोर्सेस हो सकता है। तो पॉइंट सोर्सेस के लिए तो इट इज इजी, आप ट्रीट करना स्टार्ट कीजिए, ठीक है, यू ट्रीट द इंडस्ट्रियल वेस्ट। बट नॉन पॉइंट सोर्सेस के लिए देयर इंटरैक्शन विद द ग्राउंड वाटर और दैट प्लेस शुड हैव सच काइंड ऑफ रूल्स, जैसे हम लोग कंस्ट्रक्शन वेस्ट मैनेजमेंट रूल्स करते हैं कि वी हैव आस्क्ड देम टू पुट अप ग्रीन कलर कर्टन which will ensure that PM2.5 dust should not escape into atmosphere. So similarly इस तरीके का कर्टनिंग किया जा सकता है कि जिस एरिया में आप माइनिंग स्टार्ट कर चुके हो, इस एरिया में यू नीड टू कर्टन आउट, put up some kind of cover such that ये dust release ना करे and we will be able to reduce the air pollution. You will also have to ensure कि जब भी इस एरिया में रेनफॉल हो, that water should get collected at a particular place and that water needs to be treated, ठीक है, such that कि इसका ग्राउंड वाटर कंटेमिनेशन नहीं हो। यू शुड ऑल्सो बी इंश्योरिंग कि जब आप इस तरीके के माइनिंग करते हो और इसका फिल्ट्रेशन कर रहे हो, तो दीज काइंड ऑफ हेवी मेटल्स मस्ट बी ट्रीटेड। नाउ ट्रीटिंग ऑफ हेवी मेटल्स के लिए हमारे पास बहुत ऑप्शंस है, यू कैन यूज अ फ्लाई ऐश, यू कैन यूज वाटर हाइसिंथ फॉर दैट मैटर। सो ट्रीटमेंट ऑफ हेवी मेटल्स के लिए हमारे पास ऑप्शन है, वी नीड टू एंश्योर दैट इस तरीके का रेगुलेशन आना चाहिए, ठीक है। सो इस तरीके का एनवायरमेंटल हजार्ड को रिड्यूस करने के लिए वी हैव वेरियस ऑप्शंस, ओके। सो दिस could be part of your conclusion. Now moving on to the next question. Write a review on India's climate commitments under Paris Agreement 2015 and mention how these have been further strengthened in COP 2021, ठीक है। In this direction, how has the first nationally determined contributions intended by India been updated in 2022? So basically the question is, this is just an extension. ये बेसिकली हमसे ये पूछ रहा है क्वेश्चन में कि 2015 में हम लोगों ने कुछ INDCs सबमिट किए थे। एवरी कंट्री वाज सपोज्ड टू सबमिट द INDCs, इंटेंडेड नेशनली डिटरमाइंड कंट्रीब्यूशंस, एट द पेरिस मीट, ठीक है। और हम लोगों ने ये उस समय डिसाइड किया था, UNFCCC had decided कि आप जो भी पेरिस गोल्स में सबमिट कर रहे हो, दिस विल बी एप्लीकेबल फ्रॉम 2020, ठीक है, और ये 10 साल का टारगेट रहेगा, दैट इज 2030. बट when the countries met at Paris और ये मीटिंग खत्म हुई, तो there were so many international organizations including IPCC who were saying कि every country whatever you have submitted as your INDC is not sufficient, so you need to update them. तो in countries including India we have also updated. तो पेरिस में हम लोगों ने क्या क्या प्रॉमिस किया था? फॉर एग्जांपल एक प्रॉमिस था कि 2.5 to 3 मिलियन टन का कार्बन सीक्वेस्ट्रेशन बनाएंगे, ठीक है. एक हमारा प्रॉमिस था कि 33 to 35% ऑफ जीडीपी का एमिशन इंटेंसिटी कम करेंगे, ठीक है. एमिशन इंटेंसिटी ऑफ जीडीपी कहने का मतलब कि हर एक यूनिट ऑफ इंक्रीज विद जीडीपी के साथ इतना इतना एमिशन हम लोग कम करते चले जाएंगे, ठीक है. दिस वाज वन टारगेट, दिस वाज अनदर टारगेट. द थर्ड टारगेट वाज कि हम लोग अपने टोटल क्यूमुलेटिव एनर्जी का 40% एक्चुअली ये नॉन फॉसिल फ्यूल सोर्सेज से रहेगा, ठीक है. बट दिस वी हैव अपडेटेड, ये 2015 का टारगेट था, दिस वाज पेरिस क्लाइमेट डील, बट दिस वी हैव अपडेटेड इन 2021, दैट इज COP26 में इंडिया हैड सबमिटेड पंचामृत प्लान. पंचामृत प्लान में वी हैव अपडेटेड ऑल ऑफ दीज टारगेट्स. हाउ हैव वी अपडेटेड? पहला, 500 गीगावाट्स हमारा टोटल नॉन फॉसिल फ्यूल सोर्सेज से एनर्जी जनरेशन रहेगा. सेकंड, इंस्टेड ऑफ दिस 40% वी हैव इंक्रीज्ड दिस टू 50%. ये जो 500 गीगावाट्स है ये हमारे क्यूमुलेटिव एनर्जी का 50% होगा. इसका मतलब इंडिया एट दैट टाइम वी विल बी कंज्यूमिंग 1000 गीगावाट्स और उसमें से 500 गीगावाट्स नॉन फॉसिल फ्यूल सोर्सेज से रहेंगे. थर्ड इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग, ये जो 33 to 35% एमिशन इंटेंसिटी कम करने की बात थी, इसे हम लोगों ने बढ़ा के 45% एमिशन इंटेंसिटी कम करने की बात की. नेक्स्ट, 2.5 to 3 मिलियन टन्स को वी हैव इंक्रीज्ड टू 1 बिलियन टन. 1 बिलियन टन का सीक्वेस्ट्रेशन कैपेसिटी बनाएंगे. एंड लास्ट बट नॉट द लीस्ट, दैट वी विल बिकम अ नेट जीरो एमिटर बाय 2070. तो हमें पंचामृत को यहाँ पे अपडेट करने की जरूरत थी कि ये पूछ रहा था कि हाउ हैव दे बीन फर्दर स्ट्रेंथेंड इन COP26, ठीक है. So how have we updated our INDCs, intended nationally determined contributions, to COP26? अब इसका कंक्लूजन क्या हो सकता था? This could have been very interesting. Now एक हमारा INDC ये भी रहा था that we will mobilize funds from developed nations. So you could have written very interestingly that India being a developing nation, we have updated our targets to INDCs. But ये एक जो fund था, ये जो एक promise था that we will be mobilizing funds from developed nations to the developing ones, इसमें कोई progress नहीं हो पाया. That means India being a developing nation has shown some commitment towards environment, but developed nations themselves have not shown any commitment towards better environment. ये हमारे conclusion का part हो सकता था, that we expect the developed nations, just like developing nations such as India, who have updated their INDCs, we also expect it from the developed nations that you should also be mobilizing funds or at least addressing your own climate promises with respect to finances. Okay, so that could have been your conclusion. Okay, so with that we have completed our discussion of GS paper 3 environment. If you have any doubts, you can submit your answers also. We will be ready to evaluate it anytime. I wish you all the very best and thank you so much.